The new year arrives with the same old weather pattern, and that means winter storm watches and winter storm warnings up in the western half of the U.S., while in the eastern half, it's something closer to, I don't know, November or April, the way things are. And we will, of course, talk all about it today on the first Joe and Joe Weather Show of 2023. Happy New Year to all. Brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, and Southwest Suffolk County on Long Island. They are Long Island's largest rock salt source. There hasn't been much use for rock salt so far this young winter season, but who knows? Things may change. And of course, they have all the great snow and ice melt products like Mag and Pelido, snow blowers, snow shovels, and any other storm supplies you might need, including batteries, generators, flashlights, etc. 631-756-1125 for the best prices anywhere. The website, of course, as we all know, is
OmniTrueValue.com. Happy New Year, Joe.
Happy New Year, Joe. He's Joe Rayo. He sits on the right side, and yes, weather prophet you are. And I'm Joe Cioffi, and I sit on the left side, and that's a great T-shirt. And welcome to our Sunday morning Joe and Joe Weather Show. Happy New Year to everybody on the chat board.
Two bits of wisdom. This being the very first Joe and Joe of the new year. Number one, a pink elephant is a beast of Bourbon.
That's correct.
And also, if you're afraid of New Year's Eve, then you're suffering from old anxiety. Happy 2023 to you and everybody, Joe.
Yes, and welcome to everybody on the chat board. Happy New Year. Either your party was so good that you still haven't gone to bed, you figured you'd watch the Joe and Joe Weather Show before going to bed, or your party was so terrible you went to bed early and have been up since 5 like I have. So
well, one of the things that we don't have to do anymore, and I know you have talked many times about being at Pix 11 on New Year's Eve and having to work the overnight there while everybody else was celebrating. And I've done a few New Year's Eves as well. In fact, the most memorable one was I was filling in on New Year's Eve in 1993. And believe it or not, Joe, I had Mr. Zimmerman there. Bill Zimmerman was anchoring that night, along with a couple of other people. And from what I hear from our former colleague, Norm DeVoskin, it was that night that Bill Zimmerman started to hate me because he was trying to play this up as an important night. He was there. He was giving the news. He felt everybody needed to be informed.
I know about this.
And when the camera came to me, as there's Joe Rayo with the weather, I looked straight into the camera and I said, if any of you are watching us right now, it probably means your New Year's Eve party was a flop. And Bill looked at me with the evil eye, and I think that was the last time he and I said a nice word to each other after that.
Too funny. Too funny. Yeah, I did not go to the possum drop last night. Bill Uber on the chat board asking me. I did not go. New Year's has never been. I'm not a party person. I never have been. If I have to go to the events, I'm usually the person that winds up to being the first to arrive to get to the food and the first to leave to get out before the traffic. So it's not my thing. And I did what I needed to do yesterday. Was I went through paper and laundry and all sorts of other things. I could finally see my bedroom for the first time in ages. So that's.
So you're more like Oscar than Felix.
I wouldn't say that. In some ways, I'm probably more like Felix. In some ways, I'm more like Oscar. When I say I couldn't see my bedroom, that's a big exaggeration. I just had I had stuff that I needed to put away, and they were sitting on the boxes waiting to be put away. So I just went ahead and put them away, among other things. But it's much better now. I feel very free, very free. So anyway, new year, no same old pattern. We weren't expecting anything to change much in the last couple of days that we've been off, and lo and behold, nothing has changed. I think it's kind of interesting down the road in the long range, which we'll get to. And Joe Lopresti is the first hit of the tip jar. Joe, the super chat tip jar, the first one of 2023. Thank you, Joe. Most appreciated
Thank you very much, Joe.
On this New Year's Day. A lot of fog around early this morning. I still actually have some here, but you seem to
Oh
be
God.
you seem to be mostly in the clear. I've had a few people message me saying that the fog was particularly nasty this morning.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about this morning, but heading to my son's house. My son's only about 8 minutes away, but it was a drive that was almost like a white knuckle drive because the fog was so thick and so dense. And the interesting thing was that the Weather Service, that we started out the day yesterday with a dense fog advisory, and they said the fog advisory was going to lift at 11 a.m. Then at 11 a.m. they extended it to like 4 p.m. And then when it was 4 p.m. they extended it to like 8 p.m. They kept extending it. The fog just didn't want to go away, and it stayed with us until it was time for us to leave my son's home, like a little bit after 1 a.m. I mean, it just did not. But when I woke up this morning, you're right. But whatever weather system came along, we know that the winds did shift eventually into the west and dried things out. And this morning it is fairly nice, not brilliantly sunny, but bright and sunny in the fog. She is gone.
Yeah. Quincy McCoy on the chat board, Joe, he says he had fog more yesterday morning in eastern North Carolina. NWS Raleigh had Nash County in a dense fog advisory. It's clear there now with a mix of sunshine and some leftover low clouds. I'm still sitting in a cloud cover here, and the mountains are still kind of foggy, but it's not as bad as it was earlier this morning. So anyway, on that note, why don't we take a look at what's going on? Because there are things going on in the world of weather.
And speaking of weather, at Central Park, at ball drop time last night or early this morning, the temperature, at least according to what I can see here, 54 degrees, and that 54 places the ball drop of 2022 number 3 on the list. The warmest temperature at midnight on New Year's Eve at Central Park tied 1966 and 1973 with 58. Then was 1993 at 55. And then right behind 1993 with 54 was last night or this morning with 54, followed by 52 in 1937 and 2005. 1979 was 50. 2003 was 49. And what a contrast, Joe, to just 4 years ago. If many of you remember, in 2018 at Central Park, the second coldest ball drop, 9 degrees above zero. Of course, the all-time record for midnight on New Year's Eve at Central Park, one, and that was back in 1918. Nothing like that last night or this morning, though. Again, a very balmy, and the rain, which fell through much of the evening, kind of petered out and ended just as the ball was beginning to descend down the flagpole last night. So it was a balmy, one of the warmest nights, New Year's Eve nights that we've seen around here in over 100 years.
Yep. And now let's see where we go because it's going to be warm into the middle of this week. But we do have winter weather going on in some places, so we're going to check that out right now as I switch over to the watches and warnings, and I just take myself off the screen. And there you are. So we've got winter storm watches up for you. Yes, Northwest Wisconsin. That ought to spin a few heads with a little bit of leftover partying from last night. Winter storm watches up for northwestern Wisconsin, much of the southern half of Minnesota, northwestern Iowa, also into South Dakota and Nebraska. Then we have winter storm warnings up in southwestern Nebraska and northwestern I'm sorry, northwestern Nebraska and southwestern South Dakota. Much of Wyoming under a winter storm warning, as is the western half of Colorado into Utah. Warnings up in a few counties in Nevada. And California is kind of getting a break because they got heavy rain yesterday, so things have calmed down today. So we don't have flash flood watches up like we've had, but there's a few wind advisories in Southern California and also in southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico. Dense fog advisories, they actually just lifted a bunch of dense fog advisories that were up for the southeast. Now they just are confined to the southern half of Louisiana, southeast Texas, southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, a small portion of southeast Kansas, and northwestern Illinois, and a couple of handful of counties in eastern Iowa. And when we check out the satellite, it's cleared out nicely along the coastal plain from southeastern New England down into Virginia and parts of eastern North Carolina. You can see the leftover clouds over South Carolina and Georgia. There's clouds moving across the Great Lakes, and those are not really going to be doing very much in terms of producing. And then we've got the next round of energy from what's come into California. It's been an endless series, Joe. There's there's been several storms that have moved inland, and they seem to be coming every other day. So this one now inland, this is going to be a big severe. This could be a big severe weather producer tomorrow in parts of the South.
And
I think it's tomorrow.
What a way! Yeah, well, let's see. Tomorrow is today
yes,
is
it's
the
tomorrow.
first.
I'm sorry.
Today is the first, and tomorrow is the second. Yeah, okay. It's a Monday too, Joe.
I know. You know, having the holidays on a Sunday and then Monday is a federal holiday, so most people have off. I have really had a tough time in the last week or so getting a sense of what day of the week it is.
Well, that's the first thing Renata and I we woke up late this morning, and the first thing she said to me was, I totally forgot it was a Sunday. It's a Sunday today. So yeah, all right. Yeah, you're right. You get thrown off when the holiday falls on a Sunday and the next day is a Monday, but it's a holiday on a Monday, you know.
Yeah. But meanwhile, back to the storm that came into California yesterday. There's another one, and it's not really quite on the screen, but if you look on the upper left, you could see the clouds already starting to sweep eastward. So they're about to go see their weather go downhill with the next storm system coming in.
Well, the Climate Prediction Center vying for attention here, along with the fact that Joe has already spilled the beans about how the weather is going to turn sharply down again across the West Coast. But they are indicating, Joe, a slight to moderate risk of excessive or heavy precipitation, liquid precipitation, well, at least what would translate into liquid precipitation across the western United States, across the West Coast, from the 7th through the 13th. So it's not just one singular system, but there are others that will be rolling in from the Pacific. And as far as snow is concerned, all of you snow lovers out there, there is a slight risk of very heavy snow across portions of the central Rockies from the 7th through the 10th of this month, and also slight chance across the Cascades all the way down to the Sierra Nevadas. And as far as wind, same thing. Heavy or excessive winds expected along the West Coast from the 7th all the way through the 13th. Indeed, the first 2 weeks of January, if you want dynamic or really active weather, the place to be is west of the Mississippi, far to the west, along the West Coast. I'm sure we'll be seeing in the coming days ahead on all of the national headlines, stories, weather stories emanating out of Los Angeles, out of San Francisco, and maybe even out of a place like Portland, Oregon, or up in the Rockies of, oh my goodness, it's snowing. Oh dear, the heavy rain again. Look at all the flooding and look at that. But again, they started this winter season in severe drought. They needed the water. They're getting the water. And again, this is not anything that resembling your typical La Nina pattern. La Nina, by the way, Joe, is expected to continue into the winter with equal chances of La Nina and Enso neutral La Nada, during January through March of 2023. And in February through April of 2023, there is a 71% chance of Enso neutral. So maybe what we're seeing here with the lack of a La Nina pattern and more of a pattern resembling an El Nino or maybe just a neutral pattern suggests that La Nina is already in the process of breaking down, because this does not look like your typical La Nina weather pattern.
No, it doesn't at all. And I think at the end of the day, it's gonna come down to what looks to be a very impressive stratospheric warming event that the long range models are showing. I think it's going to come down to and the outcome of that stratospheric warming, I think, is a bullish setup for the East in time, as long as it couples. And that's, I guess, my primary concern here. And I think back to the winter of, since I'm talking about it, I might as well bring it up. I just go back to the winter of, I believe it was 2019, 2020, where we had a really bullish development in the polar vortex at the end of January, and there's a whole bunch of other things that were happening and that was in that was in a neutral uh, and so year. Uh, the polar vortex split at the end of January, and it didn't matter. It just never coupled down to the surface. And we had all these other things with other indicators showing that we're going to have, that was going to be a really active second half, and that whole winter pretty much behaved as if we had an El Nino going, or a strong La Nina going. Because it just never coupled down to the low levels of the atmosphere. But just going back to what I was saying here, we've already passed the point where the polar vortex was wrapped up like a tight little ball. That was back on Wednesday of last week. And since then, it's beginning this long stretching process where the trough in the stratosphere kind of moves to eastern Canada and into the eastern part of the United States. And if you look over Siberia, you see that brownish area. That is that one stratospheric warming event that's coming early next week. And then a really super duper stratospheric warming here, Joe. Look at that massive amount of warm air that's coming around from Europe. It actually starts over Europe and then comes all the way around through Asia, and then rips up into the polar vortex, which almost looks like, and this is the last day on here is January 17th, that the polar vortex is stretched to the point that it looks like it's almost about to split. So again, does it couple to the low levels of the atmosphere? And you know what? Even if it doesn't split, if it has this orientation, if it is disruptive enough that it goes all the way down to the lower levels of the atmosphere, this again would be supportive, I think, of the idea that the second half of January could see some pretty interesting weather in the eastern part of the United States.
Well, if that be the case, you'll have to tell the folks over at CPC that, because they have pretty much broad brushed the temperature probabilities above normal right on through most of January, all the way to the almost to the end of the month. But we've seen that they have changed their minds in the past, and maybe they'll be changing their minds again in the coming days. But right now, Joe, they think that we're going to remain on the mild side. Well, actually, it is going to be rather mild for much of this week, but we do take a rather notable sharp downturn temperature-wise at the end of this upcoming week, a little sharp change to colder weather when we get to Thursday and especially Friday. So not necessarily consistently above normal or consistently, like a 1,200 watt hair dryer, so to speak, but it will be turning colder later on this week.
All right, let's check out the radar. We'll come back to all of this in a minute, and I just kind of drew the area of snow that we're seeing this morning as of 11:21 Eastern Time. By the way, Joe Rayo is monitoring the chat board furiously, so if you have questions or comments, by all means leave them and hope. And if he sees them, we'll pass them along and see what we could do with them. And in the
Um,
meantime, if you're
on the
new to,
chat
go
on
ahead.
the chat board, on the chat board, James Davidson more than once now asking a question. He said, "But unfortunately, this is in reference to the fact that you think that things are going to flip a bit later on in the month." Joe, he said, "But unfortunately, the cold air that whatever we do get doesn't have any staying power at all. Why is that?" In other words, I think James Davidson wants it to once it gets cold, he wants to stay cold for weeks on
Right.
end. I don't know if I'm on board with that, but he's just wondering, I guess, why is it that we get cold for maybe a few days and then all of a sudden it just as quickly moves out and we're back to warm weather again?
Well, for one thing, the blocking was destroyed by the Christmas, the storm before Christmas that went to the Great Lakes. So now it's going to have to pretty much start from scratch. And the pattern has been much more progressive, where things are just moving along. And we don't have a connection from Canada. Now, my guess is, and again, I want to make it clear, all of this could go on in the upper layers, way up into the top of the atmosphere. If it doesn't couple down to the bottom, uh, we could be sitting here, you could be sitting there here in the east, twiddling our thumbs regarding when is this, pattern going to break. But uh, there's nothing to indicate at the moment that it won't couple. Let's put it that way. But I'm just being a little extra cautious. I don't know, for some reason I got it into my head that it won't couple. But on the other hand, if we wind up, and I'll just go back to this, if we wind up with something like this, if this can hold this position, because if you look at what happens here, and remember there is a lag time, so the the lag time could be a week, it could be 2 weeks before we fully see the ramifications of all of this. But we get into the polar vortex. North-south trough is set up. Um, this is January 14th, so we're already seeing it set up here. And then, of course, the last day of this forecast period was the 17th. The question to me would be, does this kind of whether it splits or not is a whole other conversation. But if the stratosphere and the trough is tilted in this way and it can hold, that would be more supportive for the idea that maybe the cold will have staying power. But again, that's the big question. Does it hold, or does eventually that whole thing just pull out? This is all speculative, as far as my part is concerned. And you're right. We've seen CPC do late flips on the overall pattern. Uh, and they're kind of looking at this, and if you look at we look at the bottom of the atmosphere, there's some changes that go on, but it's not enough to really alter the overall pattern too much. But uh, that doesn't mean that the models won't play catch up over the next several days, and maybe CPC will wind up playing catch up as well. So there's your snow today, up from Nevada northeastward up into Nebraska. You've got some heavy rains going on in parts of central and southern Arizona, probably some snow in the mountains there. Pretty active there. Also looks like a little squall line. There's a precip moving moving out of eastern Michigan now and kind of touching southwestern New York. But most of that's just going to fall apart. And just so that the folks in Maine, especially in northern Maine, also seeing some leftover precip there that should be getting out of the way in short order. I'm going to go to SPC because this is important for tomorrow. The Storm Prediction Center has an enhanced risk of severe weather in northeastern Texas, northwestern Louisiana, much of Arkansas, southeast Oklahoma, and that enhanced risk also reflects a 10% tornado risk, and there's a fairly large areas of 2 and 5% tornado risk. This is not going to be an overly intense storm, but it certainly is going to be intense enough. And with the warmer air that's overall in the eastern part of the United States, it is set up for a severe weather event tomorrow in this portion of the U.S.
Absolutely. And I just answering back Telly on the chat board when we were talking about CPC, Joe. Telly he's been making a number of comments, and one of the comments that he's made is CPC never predicts cold weather. And if you
well, that's not quite true.
Shift over to the shares, because I'm sharing something right now, just to gently remind Telly.
Shares turned on, so I just got to put your face on here.
Right, it's already up there.
It's up there now.
Yeah, I mean, Telly, this wasn't too long ago. This, in fact, was issued by CPC back on December 15th, 2 weeks ago. They never predict cold weather, Telly. Well, take a look at this. I think they were pretty much on the mark with this forecast for very, very cold weather across much of the eastern U.S., east of the Mississippi. So yeah, when it looks like it's going to get cold, believe me, they will let you know, and they do let you know. So they were pretty much on target with that forecast, and it's just that I guess Joe Telly is expressing the same kind of frustration that so many of the winter weather lovers so far this season have indicated, and that is, when is it ever going to turn cold, and when are we ever going to get a shot at snow? It's not going to be in the immediate future, but it may very well come. Let's put it this way. I've yet to use my snowblower. I've been up here in Putnam Valley 20 years. This is my 21st winter. I've always have had to use my snowblower at least once. In fact, a few years ago, even when Central Park had only 5 inches for the whole season, I still had to break it out 4 times. I'd love to have a winter, personally, where I don't have to use the snowblower at all, but it's going to happen. One day it will. It may happen this month of January or February or even into March, but it will happen. Telly and all of you winter weather lovers out there, your day will come.
Adam Lowe says, pointing out the Madden-Julian oscillation, which is in phase 6 right now, which is a warm phase, and it's on its way to 7 this week, and it's forecast to go into phase 8. Now, phases 8, 1, and 2 are cold phases for the eastern part of the United States, and he says that the MJO has been perfectly coupled with the East Coast weather for the last 5 weeks. So my fear of coupling may be overstated, perhaps. We'll find out soon enough. I want to see some evidence when we get into the mid-range guidance period. I want to just start seeing some evidence that things are changing at those levels underneath the stratosphere. So let's run back to the maps here and take a look at where we're going with precip this week. So just give me a moment here while a little slow on the uptake today, but I'll get there. Just a second. I got to get the map up first, which I did. And
I almost felt when I was talking about cold weather and the snow will come eventually, both Telly and also Quincy McCoy and a couple of others all saying the same thing. Appreciated Joe Rayo. Thanks, Joe Rayo, for the positive news. I almost felt like Newt Rockney for a moment, giving a mid-game pet talk to the team or whatever. But it will happen, but not in the immediate future.
So here's the 7-day precip amount. Look at that in California. Remember, they've already had, I believe they've had 3 storms come in the last 7 days. Rainfall amounts are really impressive here, where along up and down the coast, almost down to San Diego, all the way down to San Diego, in fact, and especially in and around LA and San Francisco, looking at rainfall amounts of 5 to 10 inches. In the next 7, and also up in the Sierra Nevadas, or to the east in the Sierra Nevadas. A lot of that would be in the form of snow. The east, we're looking at about a half to maybe 3/4 of an inch of precip to look ahead to this coming week. And there is heavier precip in the Tennessee and lower Ohio Valley, in the parts of the lower Mississippi Valley, where we're looking at rainfall amounts of 1.5 inches to a few little pockets there of 2.5 inches plus. So most of the country is actually going to be on the, precipitation-wise, let's call it the wet side. There will be some snow in the mix, obviously, out of all of this. And speaking of which, here is WPC's probability for at least 2. and it covers, whenever you see a probability map and it looks like this, folks, where this, you know how the storms are going. They're coming down here and then they're going up this way. So
Right.
that's pretty much the case. You have this large area of 50% or higher, and in some cases 90% or higher of at least two. If we switch over to the 8-inch probability, there's actually a lot of areas from Wyoming, which is why they have these winter storm warnings up, and in northern Nebraska, southern South Dakota into Minnesota, where you have 50% higher probabilities of at least 8. In California, now here's the thing: there's no Arctic air around, so while there is some snow being indicated for the Sierra Nevadas, it's not a particularly high probability, for at least through Wednesday morning. But remember, there's more storms coming in over the 7-day period, and there's not a whole lot really to speak of when you look at the long range in the eastern part of the United States. Let me just put up the state boundaries here. You can see it's all in the west. So Wednesday into Thursday, they've got a stripe there in the Sierra Nevadas of 70 to 90%, and then most of the, a large portion of the west is 10 to 30 or 30 to 50 for Thursday, and then again also for Friday starts to go further inland into Idaho and Utah, and then there's not a whole lot for Friday into Saturday, Saturday into Sunday for next weekend, and of course in the east there's hardly anything to speak of when it comes to snowfall.
And Joe Lopresti on the chat board mentioning to getting back to the accuracy of CPC. He said CPC also predicted another very dry winter out west. 100% wrong so far. Well, Joe, they based that forecast. That was part of their winter forecast. They based it on the fact that the La Nina would continue through most of this winter, and obviously that is not the case. They've just updated their ENSO forecast by saying that La Nina is apparently fading out, and that we'll be in a neutral pattern. So that original forecast of a dry winter out west ain't working because it ain't a La Nina or much of a La Nina pattern anymore. And Joe, that view that you're showing right now, almost like an arrow pointing out how in the southern and central Rockies, all of that moisture that's literally pointing northeast. And I have to figure that the weathercasters, let's say in Minneapolis, are probably looking at all of their viewers and saying, well, here we go again, another storm. We're stuck in this pattern, and pointing out just exactly what you pointed out, that all of this stuff is just shooting northeastward. And until the pattern changes or breaks down, they're going to be in the line of fire for a number of days to come. And why is it that all of a sudden, when I talk about Minneapolis and weathercasters, I think of Gordy the Weatherman from John Amos,
Right.
from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, just standing up there in front of the camera saying, well, folks, same thing. Back to you. Back
Well,
to you, Ted.
they're forecasting 7 for Minneapolis, and in southwestern Minnesota, there's an area there of a foot plus, and also in parts of southern South Dakota, northern Nebraska, 10 to 12 inches, and then you see the amounts get even bigger as you move into Wyoming and south into Colorado. It's mostly in the western part of Colorado, not in the east, so Denver's on the low end of this. And also back into Utah, showing significant amounts of snow. And then you can see, again, this is for the period that ends Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. You can see the snows there in the Sierra Nevadas. We've seen much more impressive snowfalls forecast there. And in the Northeast through Wednesday morning, just a teeny tiny amount of snow, maybe a coating to an inch in parts of the Adirondacks, the areas, the mountains north of I-90 and west of 87. Also, some scattered coating to an inch or two, especially as you head up into northern Maine. A couple of 2s and 3s show up on their maps. So, on that particular note, and since it is now 11:36, we have enough of the new GFS to take us through. And this model has been, and the European to an extent has been doing it as well, trying to hint at the possibility that maybe enough cold air bleeds down southward from Canada at the end of the week as a wave is developing in the east, that there might be a cheap thrill snow for somebody. So we'll take a look and see what's going on. But here's the forecast for 1 o'clock this afternoon. You see a low there near Las Vegas, snow up in Nevada and into Utah. You see the system departing in the east with rain changing to snow in northern Maine and a little bit of light precip around the Great Lakes. Of course, everybody else is on the warmish side in the eastern part of the United States. And here's the next low. And you can also see the next arm of moisture coming into California during Monday with rain and snow in the mountains. Nothing particularly heavy, though. And of course, now as we go into the east, you see the low that's in southeast Colorado and into Kansas, moves up into northwest Missouri. And the snow that's to the north on the northwest side, the showers and thunderstorms that develop later Monday night in parts of Louisiana, Arkansas, northwestern Mississippi, the heavy rains going all the way up into Indiana. That low goes northeast up to just east of Minneapolis and occludes out. We get looks like a warm front's going to be setting up just to the north of the coast sometime on Tuesday, Joe. And it's probably, I think, means that if you're south of New York City, probably won't see very much. And in fact, you'll probably see your temperatures run up into the 60s with this sort of a setup. And on the other hand, if you're going to be north of that warm frontal boundary, let's say north of 84 and further north, it might be more of a cloudy, rainy type day on up into New England and back over into the eastern, into the central Great Lakes.
Yeah, I'm just looking. The temperature right now is about 48 degrees, and in the Hudson Valley, a high excuse me, a high temperature of 48 is exactly normal for the 23rd day of March.
Right.
So it's very much like a March morning out there, a March midday. And we'll be close to records here in the tri-state area probably on Wednesday with those temperatures, Wednesday and Thursday, with those temperatures soaring toward above 60 degrees. In fact, just looking here, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, well, this may not be broken. The record at White Plains, going all the way back to when they had cooperative weather observations, 1874, 66 degrees. That may be out of reach. But the Thursday record of 62, although by then we'll already be on the downturn in terms of temperatures, set back in 1993. But we're going to be close to record territory temperature-wise by midweek. So it is a very balmy week. And Telly, I'm not sure if Telly is relatively new around here. Telly, we do not, again, repeat, we do not endorse those names, those storm names. He was asking specifically, is this storm? I'm not even going to mention the name.
Don't
we don't
even
do
bring
that.
them up.
We don't do that.
Yeah. I wouldn't know one from the other. I could care less. Anyhow, here's a look at what happens later in the week. So there's your low. The warm front is to not a whole. Again, most of the rain's going to be up in upstate New York and New England with the warm front. We have a cold front that'll be coming through later Wednesday into Wednesday night. Probably get some showers with that. Now, there is a cold high with cold air in eastern Canada, and it kind of sets up there in Quebec on Thursday. The next front is going to stall along the Carolina coast, and you see it there. This is Thursday morning. You can also see the next really big system there coming into the west. Anyhow, that wave is going to develop, and you see it here, and the high is going to move up into eastern Quebec, try and build southward. And the GFS on this run has a more developed coastal low, which, unlike some of the overnight runs, including the 0Z run, which gave a few inches of snow at the end of the week, now it looks like it's more rain along the coast. But it does bring snows to upstate New York and into New England with this. I guess cold, but not cold enough. And then, of course, as we said, in the west, we've got this big low that's off the west coast that's bringing wave after wave of rain. Now, we're out to about day 11, so let's see what's going on here. After that goes by, running forward, it doesn't look, I mean, it just probably looks seasonal next weekend. Something drops. Something comes out of the plains and then just sort of weakens as it moves east. And see, here's the problem, folks. All that energy in the west, we're still kind of in a ridge position here in the eastern part of the United States. So a lot of these systems are just weakening as they move eastward rather than strengthening, which is why they're not doing very much. So now we're up to a day. This is now Tuesday, January 10th. And there's some kind of low that comes across the Gulf states. And we'll take a look at what the upper air is doing. And this one is getting kicked. It develops a storm offshore, east of well east of Virginia, North Carolina. Knowing the GFS, that probably means that it's probably much further left than that. The European will usually be in that position. Then that goes out. It's a little colder behind it. So the next high is coming down from central Canada and goes right into Quebec. And there's some kind of wrapped up 98.5-ish low over in Iowa. Still getting more stuff going on in the west. So why don't we take a look and see what the upper air looks like? And we'll bring up the full U.S. view, and which I already had, so I didn't have to bring it up again. And we could bring up the upper air. So let's run it along. You can see the ridging that's in the eastern part of the United States. In spite of all the energy that comes into the west, it just gets deflected up to the western lakes, and then it doesn't have much to it as it swings eastward. So this is the system for Friday, which comes down into Illinois and Indiana, and then there's a little bit of a negative tilt to this, which is probably why the low develops a little bit more offshore. So we'll get rid of that. Then we get kind of a flattish ridge here in the east. But, again, the next system in the Gulf that comes across the Gulf states around the 10th is a fairly sharp southern shortwave. But instead of lifting, Joe, it gets kind of sent more to the east before it lifts, at least on the GFS anyhow. And that's because you've got this system coming into the west. And, all right, let's go wider. Let's go wider. I'm looking at all of this for the first time, folks. So, I mean, I saw the older runs. Now, this only goes out, that's the wrong one. It's only out to 90 hours on the North American view, so that's not really helpful. But, this is still, though, at least for this week, you could see how the Pacific, this big wrapped up cutoff low to the west of Oregon, and there's all this energy out in the Pacific. The jet stream in the East Pacific is so far south that's why California keeps getting what they're getting. Oh, and a couple of maps now popped up out to day 10 and 11. So let's see what that looks like. So you go from where you have really here. This is Thursday. I mean, you really have no Canadian flow coming into the east. There is the flow from Canada, northwest Canada, that goes across southern Canada and into eastern Canada, but we don't have that connection going, any kind of connection from, say, northwest Canada into the southeast U.S. Now, at day 11, now here at least, Joe, there's a little bit more. It's kind of uneven, but there is a bit more of a flow out of Canada once we get past January 9th or 10th. So I guess that's where we're going with this. There's also, very interestingly, ridging that's building up in the Atlantic over toward Greenland. So, that's another thing that we're going to have to see if, are we going to get another blocking high of some sort that's going to develop up there in the North Atlantic? All in the world of uncertainty in the long term.
And looking back in the history books, Joe, I mean, for all of those on the chat board who are snow lovers and or we're hoping maybe that we would transition into a cold and snowy pattern as we moved into 2023. And I remember this, and I'm sure you do too, Joe. 1971, it was a Friday, first day of the new year. Old Man Winter, and this is, by the way, from Rob Friedowitz's page, weather page, great climo historian. 1971, Friday, Old Man Winter waited until New Year's Eve revelers were safely home before dumping the winter's largest snowfall, 6.4 inches accumulated between 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. on New Year's Day. Much of it fell in the storm's initial 3 hours. And this was the 20th century's largest New Year's Day snowfall and second of all time. The biggest still which still stands way back in 1869 when New Year's Day saw 9, count them, 9 inches of snow. Of course, we are very far, far away from those kind of circumstances in New Year's Day 2023.
We had a couple of more super chat hits. Robert Russo, thank you, Robert, with the cup of coffee emoji, and Leon Pobritsky. Not sure what that is, the emoji on that, but also hitting super chat. Thank you very much from both of you. And there might be another one. Here we go. Izzy D. Hitting super chat. William Uber starting off the new year, hitting the tip jar too. Thank you very much. And they joined Joe Lopresti, who hit it at the very beginning of the show from the get-go. So, we're kind of in this, this kind of winter storm Hudson. You got to be kidding me. Seriously? I just saw that. God, please.
Oh, they're really making hay with that.
When does it ever stop, Joe? Is it ever going to stop? It just doesn't stop.
I mentioned the last time we were on, I've been doing a lot of spring cleaning down here, my office, and I have WeatherWise magazine going all the way back, Joe, to the early 1980s, and one particular issue highlighted the new Weather Channel. The Weather Channel had just begun, and I'm reading about it. And what the Weather Channel was when it first started back in 1982 is so different than what we now have. And you figure, 40 years ago, whenever something starts, if it lasts for 40 years, that it's so much better now as opposed to when it first began. Quite frankly, to me, the Weather Channel was so much better 40 years ago as opposed to what we have right now. I don't even watch the Weather Channel anymore.
I haven't watched it in
it is
years.
Just so,
I mean, really a lot of years.
The only time I see the Weather Channel is when, at dinner time, I'm watching the CBS Evening News, and apparently they have partnered now, the Weather Channel has, with CBS. And so I must, when I'm watching the news, if there's a weather headline story, I have to see one of the meteorologists on the Weather Channel talk for a minute or two, and they always do the same thing. The guy makes believe, I don't even know the meteorologist's name, but he makes believe he's out in the open somewhere. Like if it's a big story about a snowstorm, they try to make it look like he's out in the middle of the snowstorm talking about the snow or the rain or whatever. It is so silly. And I yearn for the days when, here are some names from the past: Charlie Welch, John Hope.
John Hope. I was just going to say, also
Nick Mancuso, whatever. I mean, these were the people. They'd stand there, they'd pull the map out, and they would explain what's going on. Now it's got to be all fancy glitz and all this sort of stuff.
I don't watch. It's a waste of my time to watch. I actually have 3 weather channels on my streaming system, my DirecTV. So I have AccuWeather, the Weather Channel, and Fox Weather, and our old colleague Jeff Banson works over at Fox Weather, so we'll give him a shout out to Jeffrey. But I don't watch at all, and every once in a while, because I occasionally will, like most guys with a remote in their hand, you got to channel surf. So every once in a while, as I channel surf, I will stop at that point for a brief moment. And usually within about 10 seconds, I've had enough, and I move on to the next one and the next one, and then I'm past them. So yeah, it's.
There's a name.
I just
there's
can't
a name on the
waste my time.
There's a name on the chat board. Keith James second just brought up Janetta Jones. Boy, I haven't thought about that day. But I'll tell you what, it went downhill. I think the Weather Channel went downhill, at least for me, when Paul Cosin, who was their winter weather expert, when they phased him out, I said, and I don't know why, maybe he left on his own volition or whatever, but I mean, that's when it ended for me, as far as, or when they started showing movies on the Weather Channel.
Well, that's basically when NBC bought them.
Yeah.
It became a disaster. And I mean, they were very successful in taking the Weather Channel. I think they paid, I want to say $3 or $4 billion, and they wound up
Billion.
billion with a
Billions.
B, and and
And now that,
wound up selling it for like 200 million. So,
right,
you
to a
know,
comedian.
which is a great way to do business. You'll, you know, uh, yeah, William Faines hitting super chat. Thank you. Happy New Year. Love the show, he says. And I think you're new to the chat board and new to the channel. Appreciate you being here and appreciate you banging the tip jar on New Year's Day. And yes, Civilian Warrior brings up there was the weather classroom. You know, they have those days are gone. Those days
The
are
weather in your
gone.
health. The weather in your health.
Weather in your
Or
health, yes.
Mac the mechanic.
Well, look, we could go at this all day long. At the end of the day, it's basically been reduced to a glorified TikTok video. I think all of the channels are, certainly all the news channels are. Uh, it's funny. I was just watching some local news. I don't know how they do it, Joe. Down here, local, and I know why it's happening because 5 years from now, okay, 5 years from now, CBS, NBC, and ABC, as we know it, will probably cease to exist. Uh, the, CBS is already on its way because they're part of the old Viacom, which is now and they merged with
Paramount.
Paramount. So
Paramount.
the legacy media, as we know it, is going to be gone, which is really going to be left with local channels that are going to be doing, you know, they'll have their coverage from whatever network they happen to be hooked up with, like they do now, but they'll have to fill time and they'll be doing news constantly. I mean, I just don't understand it. They're on at 4 a.m. till 10 a.m. in the morning doing 6 hours of news here on these channels. Then they're on at noon again for an hour to an hour and a half, only to come back at 4 o'clock, and then they're on till 7. I mean, it's just nonstop. There can't, I live outside of 2 hours outside of Atlanta, so I know Atlanta's a big city. There's a lot going on, and I get that, but they fill these newscasts up with just nonsense. I mean,
Yeah.
stuff that just we never when we you and I first started. And by the way, this is also extends. I was just noticing on Facebook some of the news stories that the TV stations, News 12 comes up and they had these stories, and I'm like, what? I can't remember specifically what it was, but it was something just so ridiculous that it's like, why is this even news? It's like somebody's cat's food dish was stolen, and the entire, the town of the town of Pleasantville was, and I made that up, not to name the specific town because I just don't remember the specific story, but in my illustration, and the whole town of Pleasantville is in an uproar over the stolen, bowl of cat food. I mean, come on, when does that? Just stop it. Just stop it already. This was something, I don't know what just happened. Hang on a second, I got to fix this. I didn't do anything. I didn't touch my computer, and it changed. Oh, you put the share screen up. Okay,
Yeah.
I see. Never mind. I got to get my face out of the way so everybody can see.
There is a Facebook page, and the Facebook page bring Paul Cosin back to the Weather Channel.
Oh, he was great. He was really great. I've got the Cosin books, the Cosin Uccellini books for the snowstorms of the Northeast. I mean, those are terrific books. If you're a weather fanatic, those are must-haves. I mean, they are just, there's I think 2 volumes of it now. I don't have the second volume. I think I went to order it and it was not available. They were out of them. But
there you go. Somebody actually wrote on the chat board that he died. No, he did not die. He is still alive and well and with us. In fact, his
TV career may have died, but no, he's still with us.
And I can empathize there, and so can Joe. That the very knowledgeable guy, but just for whatever reason. But he's I think he's at is he at WPC, or maybe he just simply retired and said the heck with it? I don't want to do this anymore.
I have no idea.
But anyway, if you're interested on Facebook, there is a page. Bring Paul Cosin back to the Weather Channel. I'll tell you something. If he came back to the Weather Channel, I think there'd suddenly be a spike in the Weather Channel's ratings because everybody stopped and listened and believed in what Paul said when we had winter storms. It was and as I said, I stopped watching really in the wintertime when Paul left the Weather Channel. And what else can you say? He's a great guy.
You're right. And you're right. What else can we say? Although, let me just look really quick before I say it. Trying to see if there's anything new in the long range. If it's gone out a little bit, a few more maps may have come out since we last spoke.
Dennis Cassia said, I lived in Pleasantville. Dennis, was that when you used to be in black and white?
Oh, good Lord. All right, you know what? On that note, the sun is about to peer through the clouds here. I'm going to take the dog to the PARK to go for a WALK. And we will be back tomorrow. Oh, Joe, the sex spots are back. Yay,
yes, I
the
see.
sex spots are back. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
We're starting the year off right, I guess. They're paying attention to us. So we'll be back tomorrow night at 7:35 Eastern Time to kick off the new week. Tomorrow's a holiday, but Joe and I are always working.
We're here.
Yes, we're here. So we'll see you tomorrow night, folks, at 7:35 Eastern Time. John Charles says, did any of you guys apply to the Weather Channel? No. When the Weather Channel first went up back in the early 80s, I got contacted on the phone. They were interested, and I basically blew the phone interview. So that was, and thankfully I did. So
I did actually apply to them back in the early 80s, and I got a letter back from Ray Ban. Remember Ray Ban? He was in charge, I guess, of hiring, and he said, well, we looked at your tape, and well, you still need some work, but we'll keep it on here, and if we think we need you, we'll give you a call. And they never called me from that. And then back in 2017, 6 years ago now, when I put together a media junket for the Great American Solar Eclipse, and for Alaska Airlines, and all sorts of news media were on that plane as we were chasing the moon's shadow. And guess who was on board? Not Ray Ban, but it was a representative from the Weather Channel. And he's like, anxiously, he's holding his microphone. Excuse me, could we possibly have an interview? Can we talk to you? And I looked at the guy, and I felt like says, you weren't interested in me back in 1982. Why would you be interested in talking to me now?
Good for you. And how did I blow the interview, Telly? I think in the second sentence I uttered was that I wanted a certain dollar amount to go there, and that was like right at the very beginning of the interview process. Actually, it wasn't a phone interview like they had phone interviews today. It was a phone call, and we just started a conversation, and I basically said, well, you got to pay me X amount of dollars, and that ended the conversation. So
it was boot camp. They called it in 1982 before the Weather Channel went on the air, and they were gathering resumes and CVs from all meteorologists across the country, and then they put everything together, and they put their team together, and they were practicing and getting in Atlanta. That's where they were based. I don't know if they're still based there specifically, but it was called boot camp. And then they went on the air, and the rest, I guess, is history.
It is, and we are now history for today.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.